In 2017, a man named David Carlson bought a lottery ticket on his way home from work. The next day, still rushing to get to his shift, he checked the numbers almost as an afterthought. What he saw stopped him cold. He had just become a multi-millionaire overnight. But instead of celebrating, David did something almost nobody in his position ever does. Within hours, he was gone, completely, deliberately gone. This is the story of how he pulled it off. David was 38 years old, working the early shift at a distribution warehouse outside Valdosta, Georgia. Same route every day, same forklift, same lunch at 11:15. He wasn't a man who talked much, and for 11 straight years, he'd quietly played the same lottery numbers without ever mentioning it to a single coworker. Not out of secrecy. He just believed hope was something you kept to yourself. He bought the ticket at a Shell station a few miles from his apartment, paying cash, cap pulled low, same as always. The next night, sitting on his couch, he checked the drawer. He didn't scream, he didn't call anyone. He sat still for 4 minutes. Then he walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and checked the numbers again. And again, $312 million. The lump sum option came to roughly $187 million before taxes. The first feeling David had wasn't joy. It was fear, not of the money itself, but of everything that could go wrong if he mishandled what came next. He'd spent years reading about lottery winners, and not the happy stories. He knew about Jack Whitaker, who won over $300 million in West Virginia, and later called it a curse after losing his marriage, his granddaughter, and pieces of his fortune to people who got close to him. He knew about Abraham Shakespeare, murdered by someone he trusted with his money. He knew about Billy Bob Harrell Jr., a Texas winner who gave away much of his fortune and tragically took his own life less than 2 years after winning. David understood exactly what he was holding and exactly how badly it could end. So before he even touched his own phone, he drove to a Walmart 14 miles away and paid cash for a prepaid burner phone. From an empty parking lot, he called a number he'd memorized years earlier, a lottery attorney based in Atlanta. Most people don't realize this kind of specialist even exists, but there are a small number of attorneys across the country who focus entirely on guiding big winners through exactly this situation. Their advice is almost always the same. Don't sign the ticket yet, don't tell your family yet, and don't go anywhere near the lottery office yet. The attorney walked David through the next 3 days, step by step. First, don't sign anything. An unsigned ticket can technically be claimed by whoever eventually signs it, so signing too early locks you into an identity you may not want attached to the claim yet. Second, photograph the ticket immediately, front and back, and store it in 2 separate secure places. David did exactly that, original in a fireproof lockbox. Photos uploaded to an encrypted account tied to a brand new email address with no connection to his real name. Third, tell absolutely no one. The attorney had seen cases unravel from a single quiet conversation. One winner told his wife, she told her sister, and within 2 weeks, 3 separate lawsuits had been filed. David followed every instruction without deviation. Wednesday morning, he texted his supervisor one word, sick. It was the only lie he ever told using his real name. Then he powered off his regular phone, pulled the SIM card, and didn't touch either again for over a week. What followed was a careful, deliberate disappearing act. No big purchases, no celebration, nothing that would draw attention. He rented a storage unit with cash and left his important documents inside: birth certificate, social security card, an old hard drive. Then he drove 4 hours to Atlanta and checked into a hotel under a friend's name, living off vending machine food and communicating with his attorney only through the burner phone. Here's something most people never think about. The first 24 hours after a big win are actually the most watched moment of a winner's life, even before anyone officially knows their name. Retailers often flag large winning tickets internally the moment they're scanned. In small counties, word can travel through informal channels within hours. David had gotten lucky in one specific way. He'd paid cash, worn a cap, and left no card trail, no loyalty scan, nothing traceable back to his face. This is where David effectively disappeared on paper. Georgia allows certain winners to claim a prize through a legal entity, a trust, instead of as a named individual. and David's attorney had guided winners through this exact process more than a dozen times before. Together, they created an entity called the Meridian Asset Trust, with a professional third-party trustee based in Delaware, chosen specifically because Delaware requires very little public disclosure for trust structures. David's name appeared nowhere on the paperwork. Less than 48 hours after the draw, the Meridian Asset Trust walked into Georgia Lottery headquarters and claimed the prize. After the lump sum reduction and federal withholding, roughly $134 million landed in a trust account at a private bank David had never used before. The official press release, when it went out that Friday, mentioned only a trust entity in the Atlanta area. No name, no photo, nothing human at all. David had one sister, Renee, who lived nearby. They spoke every single Sunday without fail, had done so for 15 years. But this Sunday, David didn't call. After 3 unanswered attempts, Renee drove to his apartment and found his car gone and his mailbox overflowing. A wellness check turned up no signs of trouble, just an empty apartment with his belongings untouched. What Renee didn't know was that 2 days after winning, David had visited her in person. He sat at her kitchen table and told her calmly that he needed to disappear for a while. He handed her a sealed envelope with instructions to open it in 6 months if she hadn't heard from him. Inside was a letter explaining things in broad strokes, along with a cashier's check for $400,000 from a trust she'd never heard of. She trusted him completely and waited, even though the months that followed were some of the hardest of her life. Local reporters chased the story anyway. When they worked the retail angle, calling gas stations across the region, they eventually found the Shell station where the ticket was sold. The owner, within his legal rights, confirmed a big ticket had been sold there. Suddenly, the story had a location, and speculation started swirling through David's old community, co-workers talking, neighbors guessing. David never saw any of it. He'd stopped following Georgia news entirely the day he left. By his 3rd week away, David's attorney introduced a second layer of protection, a completely separate personal trust and a single-member LLC registered in Wyoming, one of the few states where LLC ownership isn't publicly searchable. Through that structure, David leased a home, registered a car, and even set up his phone service, all without his real name appearing anywhere. He wasn't the only one people came looking for money from. Within 6 weeks, 3 separate private investigators had been hired to track down the anonymous winner, one by a distant cousin, one by a former co-worker claiming an old debt, and one by a group asserting they had a verbal agreement to split the ticket. That last claim was the most serious, but David's attorney had already secured store surveillance footage proving one person alone had bought the ticket. The claim was dismissed within 60 days. In the end, none of the investigators found anything, no address, no financial trail, no digital footprint of any kind. One later described it as the cleanest anonymous claim he'd encountered in 20 years of work. In every legal sense that mattered, David Carlson had simply stopped being findable. Winning the money was the easy part. What David Carlson actually pulled off was something far rarer, disappearing completely, on purpose, before anyone even knew there was someone to look for.